Good morning. So today is Thursday, and this is a reminder that tomorrow is the last day of the Command the World stage series. And so being here like this week with just my voice feels like a natural segue into a podcast. So I'm contemplating that. Today's topic is what happens after emotional intelligence. What happens after emotional intelligence? So, as you're being visible on camera, right? If that's your thing, if that's a priority for you, learning how to connect on camera, um, as you're looking to do whatever your thing is in the world, which requires your confidence, which requires a strong head, all that. What you're after is what has become mainstream known as emotional intelligence, right? And emotional maturity. And really not only being mature and mature, but the intelligence to me is um, using your emotions to fuel your growth. And then two, being very mental about it. Now, this is a dance. Like, this is a whole other topic that I could riff on for, I don't know, some hours or something. The dance between how much you're going to be mental, which is very masculine, and then how much you're going to be, right, which is feminine. And in the being, learning really how to not make story, right? Because that's what happens typically. Um, in our being, we just ruminate with our feelings and thoughts, and right. And when we just be, there's feelings that come with just being, like, oh, I'm being guilty. I feel guilty because I should be working, or judging yourself for being how you're being, right? And so it's like, okay, so if I go strictly mental, then part of me may not be in the body so well. And when you're not in the body well, that has a whole other host of problems, right? Somatically, unable to feel, unable to perceive things that the mind may not automatically pick up on, et cetera, et cetera. Connecting with humans is very, somatic, even if there's no touching involved. So there's that. And then if you just be, right, where there's no structure, right, there's no planning, there's no order, which is very feminine, right, then obviously you might be able to engage in a hobby that way, or something that's comes and goes and has no end, no order, no uh, you know deliberate structure, right, to accomplish a specific thing. So then you're heavy on the feminine, right? And then so the dance always exists, both the masculine of the mental and the being, which is the feminine, right? They're both equally important, equally. So the dance is always there. So once you get really good at that dance, right? And I think if I were to break this down percentage wise, humanity, right? I'd say 80% are unaware or don't care about, like, they're not thinking about this at all. Emotional intelligence and all that. And then you got about of the 20% that remains, say approximately 15% who are in the personal growth space. Like they are reading books, they are going to retreats, they are transforming, they are healing, right? 50%. And then you have the other 5% that are beyond this whole, I'm working to, get my emotions under control. And nobody's perfect. I'm not saying this 5% is some kind of unicorn, unless they are. But I mean, people who are beyond mortal stuff, like beyond good and bad and all. Listen, okay? And so I'm interested in that conversation. I'm interested in that. I went out yesterday, was very pleased to go out yesterday because, my rotator cuff has improved greatly. Like yesterday, I put my hand over my head and I was like, yeah. I know that may seem minor, but when you first tear your rotator cuff, you cannot lift your arm even shoulder level. It was so much pain. So anyway, it's sunny here in California as almost always. And I went where I live. There's a specialty grocery store that I absolutely love. They have a food bar of prepared foods, breakfast, lunch, and dinner that I often love. And so sometimes I go there for breakfast. So I went there for breakfast yesterday. And then they have these nice tables outside and chairs with like umbrellas. And so I get my breakfast, I get some coffee, I go outside to sit down, and all the tables are taken. Two of the tables only have one person at them. And these are relatively large round tables where like maybe 6 people could sit at a table. So 2 of the tables, there were only one person. So one of the tables where there was one person, there was a guy there. And I'm like, hey, you okay if I sit here? He's like, yeah, sure, absolutely. So I sit down and he tells me he has a colleague coming very soon. So I sit down, his colleague comes maybe like 2 or 3 minutes later. And right before his colleague comes, he's like, so how's your day or something like that. So we strike up a conversation. The colleague gets involved in the conversation. And the original guy who was there, who's 28, he told me that he has recently started meditation. And I can't remember what I asked him that made that come out. But he told me he had recently started meditation and how it's been really helping him to get out of his mind. And I remember just like, yes, right? And it was wonderful. He's like, it's great to see anybody, right, be able to do that. And then women typically are, growing. It's always, women are always like, where are the men who are doing the growth and all that? So I'm always excited that, when a man, any age, is growing. So he's like, yeah, it's got me out of my mind and I'm able to connect with other people more and blah, blah. So we talked about, it was a very dynamic conversation. Myself, he and his colleague. It was a very dynamic conversation. We talked about so many things from biology to history to science to so many things. It was great. And he shared a blog, a podcast. I can't remember the guy's last name, but his first name is Lex. And I think he does AI for Tesla and he's a graduate of MIT and all. So basically he's like, yeah, I love listening to this Lex guy. I love listening to Joe Rogan. I also love listening to Joe Rogan. And then some other podcasts he mentioned. And so when he talked about this podcast, I was intrigued. I was like, yeah, that sounds like something I love to hear more. So I go to the podcast and instantly, like the first podcast I open, I'm like laughing hysterically within like the first 5, after all the ads, because this is a very popular podcast. The popular podcasts have like 17 years worth of ads before the podcast actually starts. So anyway, what happened? So like the first 5 minutes of the podcast, I'm laughing hysterically. And it's really all about the truth of human nature. That's one of the podcasts is about human nature, science, biology, technology, etc. And there was something in particular. Anyway, this guy mentioned that he is particularly interested in the darker nature of human beings because it really helps a person really see the dynamic of humans. And he has his reasons and why and all that. And the way I see that, and I'm going somewhere with this, give me a moment, how this loops into what happens beyond good and bad and all that, is when you look at just the light of a human being, right? When you look at just the light, um, which is pushed in our look for the good in people, and within context, absolutely, right? See, and this is where emotional intelligence and having a really wide lens through which to look at humanity is important, and to have emotional maturity and heightened self-awareness, and just deep understanding of human nature. And then also being deeply connected to the unseen world. And this looking at just the good in people, just the light in people, robs us of so much of the dynamism of humans. Okay. Now, when I'm emotionally mature, you're emotionally mature. What do I mean by emotionally mature? I mean, you have feelings, yes, of course, right? And they're not driving you your whole life. You actually know how to feel an emotion, not create a story or meaning out of it, not judge yourself or give yourself an identity because of it. And to the degree that you do, it's useful to yourself or others. Okay. Now, the dynamism is like, okay, well, what is useful then? Somebody might feel like my rage is useful to go kill somebody, right? So this is what I mean, the dynamism of being human and being able to look at things through an endless number of lenses. So when I look at, human nature, and I also am dialed in, I'm also highly self-aware. I've also had an opportunity to experience an innumerable number of humans in close emotional proximity, to hear fears, to hear souls, to hear hearts, to hear desires. Okay. I've also dealt in the vibrational emotion when dealing in the realm of sex and somatics. There are cousin vibrations that may seem the same, like love, right? You know the saying, there's a thin line between love and hate, right? You ever love somebody so much that it hurt? You ever love somebody so much that like you wanted to like slap them, right? The vibrations of those they're cousins. Now that's a very nuanced conversation. My point here, I'm pointing to, right? And I could get way more into, right? And that's what makes a podcast fun to me. This Lex guy, his podcasts, all of them, or from what I saw, all of them were over 2 hours, some of them over 3 hours. And I was like, oh God, I could totally see how that could happen. And he has guests. He has a lot of guests. Like he had a guest on there, Sam Harris. Oh my God, check out Sam Harris. I found out about him also through this young man yesterday. He's written a book called Lying. He has a podcast called Waking Up. I haven't listened to I think I listened to a 5-minute sample of his book called Waking Up, I think on Amazon, because he has several books. One is called Lying, and they're all about human nature and blood and the body and sex and, and all of, from what I'm hearing of these men, this stuff is beyond typical human, like mortal stuff. Like, yes, there is some mention of, but the mention of is more so like to create context, to sort of anchor listeners into the human. And then we go off from there into the nature of human beings and how different functions of the body does affect our mental. And it's just really, it's just stuff that I could listen to and would be love to riff on. Just let's talk about it. Let's get into the nuance. And something came out of my mouth yesterday and it shifted me. I was just like, oh my God, yes. What will be, could we less, where, because we were talking about cultural programming when myself and these two young men yesterday, we were talking about cultural programming and how anything that's unlike the dominant consciousness is what typically will shock the dominant consciousness because it's so unlike it, right? And basically how much, there was this conversation of how much of men's and women's behavior is biological and how much of it is centuries of programming. And like, you know, if more men start doing this, then more men will start doing this. So is it biology or is it that this is the cultural norm, right? And if more women start doing this, then more women will start doing that. So therefore, is it really biology or is it cultural programming or whatever else, you know, a researcher or a scientist would point to? So there was that. And there was also the conversation of getting answers to this, right? And are there ever really answers? Or is there information that helps to fill in questions, right? Because an answer is never conclusive. Like a scientist, a researcher, a historian, a PhD, a MIT coder, right? Yeah, numbers are finite, right? The code that makes up AI, right? Those are finite. But when it comes to the human, we're not finite. We're dynamic. We're vast. And so when we start looking at how much of this is biology, how much of this is programming, and how humans behave, and it's all subjective, and right? So when you get, and I'm going to tell you what I shared that had me so excited. When you get beyond being drowned out by your emotions or any of the stuckness that is very mortal, right? Emotional stuff, blockage in the head, physiological stuff, which is often a symptom of what's going on deeper. Who are we really? And so yesterday I was like, oh my God. And we were like thick in the soup of this dynamic conversation. I was like, what if there was no history and all of us started today? There was no yesterday. There was no Adam and Eve. We knew nothing. And he was like, yeah, and our memory was wiped, right? Like, what if we had no awareness of Adam and Eve? We had no awareness of good and bad. We had no awareness of who we were yesterday, what we did yesterday. We had no awareness of having a spouse or children, right? Or I am in this city, or maybe we knew that, like, okay, I'm in Sacramento, but there was no programming. There was no programming about who I'm supposed to be, who you're supposed to be, you know, how things work, right? There was none of that. Who would you be? Now, most people would lose their fucking mind. They create, because the mortal brain always wants a fucking explanation for things. It looks for answers, right? So that's why people are always like, well, let me go to a researcher. Let me go to a scientist. They're going to give you, and like even on this guy's Lex podcast, he has well-researched people and they all speak with that awareness. Well, and they'll say, well, the research says, well, so far what we know is, right? Is because, like I said yesterday, there's vast amounts of knowledge that many of us are yet to be aware of. And most of the knowledge that is available is unseen. It's not in books. Okay? No scientist can give it to you. The people, you are ahead of scientists. Let's just stop. Then I got into a conversation with my nephew who's smart. This young man is smart. Like, he's the weird one in his group, as I am, right? Well, was, until you get around people who see it as normal, right? And we had this conversation about humans, and he's like, humans can't keep up with the technology that they're creating. And I said, that's because they're not connected with consciousness, right? So we had this dynamic conversation, my nephew and I. And he's like, well, AI is extremely dangerous, because we started talking about AI. He's like, AI is extremely dangerous because then eventually you create this smart thing. It's going to become smarter than you. And one wrong move could be the extinction of humanity. And I'm like, so what would be wrong with the extinction of humanity? He's like, well, if that happens, no, I said, what's the actual problem with the extinction of humanity? Like, why is that a horrible thing? Right. And he's like, he's in his mind like, well, it's not an actual problem. I was laughing. I was cracking up. He was like, well, it's not an actual problem. He's like, but it would take thousands of years for us to be humans again and to be present here. He said, then it would take tens of thousands of years for us to get back to where we are today. And I was like, so what's the problem with that? He's like, well, who wants to go in cycles like that? I was like, nephew, don't you look at humans now? That's exactly what the majority of humans do now. They go in cycles, not developing, not growing, refusing to claim consciousness, refusing to revere the unseen, refusing to respect that which cannot be proven, because the mortal brain constantly is like, well, what's the facts? Well, what's the data? Well, what does the research say? Bitch, the unseen is the research. Like, really smart scientists, smart researchers, smart men and women who really are looking at information will tell you there's so much we don't know. They will tell you there's so much that's in the unseen. As a matter of fact, this scientist who was on Lex's podcast yesterday, wait, hold on, because I was listening to so many different things. Somebody said, among this array of scientists and researchers, that there was a book called, oh God, I want to know. Book, Power of Unseen. Hold on, let me see something. The Unseen Body. Yeah, I think it was like, is it The Unseen Body? Hold on. Unseen Body. Yep, The Unseen Body. Is this guy? Jonathan, The Unseen Body, A Doctor's Journey. Yeah, into your own body. The Unseen Body takes you on a journey into your own body. This is on Amazon, and at the same time takes you on a unique and exclusive journey into the fascinating training of, and you have to click on it to find out more. But this is the guy I was actually listening to last night before I went to bed, being interviewed by Lex. And see, this is the unseen body. So what this does to the mortal brain when you put a title like this is that humans can connect with it because they have a body. See, so we're getting there just very slowly. We're just getting there very slowly. And so there's always going to be the frontiers, the pioneers. But people like me, we're already aware of this. We're already aware of the unseen that is not in form, right? Right here, talks about it in form, so it helps humans connect with it. And yeah, so I say all this to say that once you develop emotionally, which is what humanity, like, this is what my nephew didn't realize, this is what he meant when he said humans can't keep up with the technology they're creating. That's hysterical to me. I said, because the consciousness is the lacking of the consciousness that is the problem. I said, once more, the tipping point where, there's a tipping point in human consciousness, then we'll start to be able to keep up with our creations. But not only keep up, we will become something else. Because right now we're just agreeing with what has been. We're just in that cycle. And humans don't want to keep going in cycles. Actually, yes, they do. Because the evidence speaks for itself. You don't have to agree. Just look at how we live, how we behave. We are in cycles. Oh, and something this guy said on his podcast that fucking blew my mind. He was like, he was like, wisdom and tradition are uh he said, because like, yes, wisdom has a place, right? It has tradition. He said, but typically wisdom and tradition is based on what has been, right? So when you are locked into what has been, how do you create the new? How do you even allow? And when the new might not necessarily mean something that literally is new, it's just new to you. You see what I mean? It's just dynamic. It's just really dynamic. And I'm just glad to see. Um, I would like to see some Black folk and folk of color get where they actually live this. Like, these men are living this. They're like, bodies of work are out there. They're like really becoming leaders of this. And I don't see any people of color becoming leaders of this. Um, I'm a leader of it. There's more that I could definitely do. I'm also having awareness of myself that um, really is in a it's beyond a niche. Yeah. So that's another conversation. I'm not. Yeah. Sometimes it's like, gosh, when I think about having conversations with humans, it's mostly uninteresting. And so when I think about even just talking about this right here, right now, I'm just like, pearls to swine. Won't even be able to see. I'm not interested in being the spectacle kind of thing, because that's what it feels like when I start just really telling the truth. Um, so this is super wonderful. When you get beyond emotions and the stuckness of them, right? And that's what I mean. I don't mean like you become emotionless, even though I like that, emotionless. It doesn't negate the fact that you have emotions. You still have emotions. It's more so where you don't make meaning out of them or judgment. Like, when you do that, you are a fucking rock star. And then you deliberately do things that have you in power over fear or power with fear, however you prefer to look at that. Like, it's so good. It's so good. Like, you can do things. Something I imagine I'll talk about, because it just seems like I want to move through it, and move through it with somebody who has the capacity to move through it with me. So like, I've taken on projects that were considered fun and big to me, right? And every time I partnered with somebody, um, even if we make wonderful progress and have, like, this Italy thing is a good example, but that's recent. I mean, I could take this, I could take this back to what, 2016, and then I'm sure I could find some more if I were to even dig more into my history, but it's like, it's always fear. Fear is always the stopper. People always fear. I mean, just even like in the last year, let's just talk about the last year in my life, in my world. It's like this, oh my God, for example, even just like a month ago. So I was completing my research around what's going on with why are there not more Black men and women really showing up or even coming together. Like, before we even start talking about showing up, okay? Coming together, staying together, right? Getting beyond emotions and programming and just like this typical way that Black people like to be with each other. And like, there's a very human part to this too, where we quietly keep each other behaving the same way. Like, yeah, you can grow, but don't grow beyond this. Don't, right? If you need, right? And so, uh, like, even the getting together, doing the research, becoming more and more aware of what's distinct about Black people and what's global, what's a universal limit and behavior. Like that's what my private research was about. Like, how much of this is Black and Black people, and based on what post-traumatic slave disorder, with Black psyche stuff. So how much of this is that Black, and how much of this is universal? That's what a lot of my research was about. And I was ready to come to the end of it, because it was becoming this, the evidence kept pointing to the same thing, which is that Black people are basically choosing to stay where they are. That's the conclusion that my research has pointed to. That when I say Black people, I mean those of us who actually are. Listen, there are many of us who want to see those of us who are connected, deeply connected at a heart level, are connected with the unseen world, who are fearless, as Tim Ferriss says, fearless, right? Like fearless versus fearless, right? I like that. Who are really looking for us to be the ones who control, steward, design every system that's at work in the world, the medical system, the government system, the financial system, right? Who want Black people who are radically mature, highly, truly spiritual, beyond this ego shit that's going on the internet. Basically, what one might look at as the ideal Christ, right? The ideal, most supreme Christ, right? Even Black folks who think on some level like that are refusing to come into their power. That's what my research has pointed to. Refusing, straight up refusing. They know. I was digging around on the internet and came across this woman. I won't say her name, but she's currently writing a book on, Black people, transformation, coaching, right? And she's in the general, so she hasn't super niched her book and title yet, but I found her article on this particular popular website and her number. So I called her, her phone number was there. So I just called her cold off the internet. But before I called her, I poked around. I went to her website. I checked her out on Instagram, on Facebook. I read different things I could find about her and to get a feel for who she is, what she is. I watched some of her videos and I said, yeah, this is the woman I like to talk to. And so my intent when I contacted her was to be able to have a detailed conversation, because in this initial conversation, I wasn't expecting to be able to have that, right? Because I'm calling her randomly cold out the blue. But I thought, right, hey, if we talk, I'd love to, schedule something if she'd like, and right. So she answers the phone. I call cold, she answers the phone. She's on the East Coast. Oh, wait, what is she? Actually, I can't remember where she is, but she's in the United States. And we're talking. And this is like a month ago. And I say, I tell her, hey, I found your article here. I checked you out. My name is Naima. I'm doing research about this, that, and that. Black people, consciousness, change, growth, power. And we were on the phone for maybe 15 minutes because she told me she had about 15 minutes. And so we definitely, I very deliberately watched the clock. I'm very respectful of time. When she told me her time, the whole time we were talking, I was watching the clock to make sure I honored the time. So we're talking and she's like, yeah, I'm doing this research right now. She said, we are our own worst enemy. That's what she said. We are our own worst enemy. And different things I was saying. And she was like, I'm getting chills. She was like, I'm getting chills. And right. It was like an environment where you could feel the agreement, okay. And so at the end of the conversation, I was like, so I'd love to talk about this more. Would you like to talk more? She's like, yeah. I said, you want to schedule something right now? She's like, no, you can email me. And so I can feel the wall, right? So I email her, never heard back. The behavior and the energy of, oh, I'm getting chills, or what I've heard a ton of, Naima, your answer to my prayer. I told Spirit yesterday I was looking for this. I told the ancestors I was looking for this, and I came across you. Oh, Naima, thank you so much. Oh my God, you're doing the God's work. Oh, Naima, this is what we need. Oh my God, Naima, this is exactly where blah. And then not following through or showing up for a little while and then abandoning ship when it gets hard, or what else? Just having some kind of emotion, which is why I said emotional control is so important. Having some kind of emotion and having that emotion be the reason why they don't complete, they abandon ship, some kind of ego thing. That right there has been the consistent behavior in my research and in working with Black people closely for the last year. That right there. So there's been a refusing to really step up, a refusing. in the powerful way that we already know. Even for those of us who have touched it, not fully, but we've touched it in a way, right? It's like we had a spark of awareness that was vast one day, and that was it, right? Or those of us who are in that vastness for longer periods of time than others, we still don't follow through. We still don't. And I don't care about the reasons. Like, we could fucking write about the reasons all day. Oh, because of this, because this systemic thing, because look at what white people have done, because yeah, okay. And so what do we do? We just stay going in cycles, like my nephew say. Humans don't want to go in cycles, nephew. Yes, they do. And I said to him, look at yourself. You know what I mean? You want to know what's going on? Look at yourself. Okay. So I say this all connects. Yeah, if we don't, and emotions are a part of the shadow part too. So you see, this is a lot that can be talked about, and I want to bring some folks into this conversation with me, who we can really have conversations that push the boundaries, that really push the boundaries, and then maybe somewhere in there we can melt some things inside of human consciousness, and then do some work around the nervous system. That's something I personally too am looking into. Because I'll be ready to go, like, and I'll go, and it's just who's going with me and doesn't quit, you know? So in closing, I'll say a couple things, maybe more than a couple. So I remember P. Diddy, like 4 years ago, he was like, man, I'm looking for fighters, man. I'm looking for warriors. You know, and before he said that, he was talking about on this journey of really living your dreams, doing your life on purpose, how it get hard, how struggle comes, how difficulty is a guarantee, right? That's it, period. And then when you're on the journey, you need people who gonna fight through the worst, the absolute worst. You need people who gonna fight through some shit where they might even be considering a life, like they rethinking their whole life in the struggle, but who persevere. And not only persevere, become stronger. Like, that's what I crave so much. And in all the partnerships that I've had, even where we made progress, like me and a woman put together this wonderful event in London in 2017. Our fame was growing so fast in Europe. It was growing, and it's exactly what I wanted. And it was big, and we were becoming faces and names. And had we stayed together, really, like, and we're still at it today, and was consistently growing as two, because remember the fuck I said, 2 or more, bitch. Okay, 2 or more. I don't give a fuck who you are. It's going to be 2 or more of the right people. You take 2 or more people who persevere, who grow, who are beyond emotions, who are beyond ego, need to be right, and are just about the vision. Man, we were growing so fucking fast. If we would have stayed together, who knows, right? But what we did in that short amount of time, which was like maybe 5 months, we had women from different European countries flying into London to the event. That's what we did in 5 months. From nobodies, meaning nobody's in Europe. We weren't known in Europe like that. I mean, I had a few clients in Europe, but I wasn't known like that. Neither was she. And in 5 months, we had chicks from different European countries flying, or parts of London, outskirts of London, different countries in Europe flying in. At the end of that event, like within 2 weeks of that event, she chose to go her own way. So she broke up the two. 2 years later, when we talked about this, and when she broke up off of it, she didn't say, I was afraid. She said, I want to go find my own way. You see the story making, this is what I mean. Anyway, right? The story making, the judging self, all that. 2 years later, we both ended up coincidentally being in the south of France. We got together, spent the day together, had a great time. And she told me, Naima, I didn't leave because I was finding my own way. I left because I was afraid. We were growing fast. Her responsibility and visibility was, respect and attention on her. This is why cash on camera exists. When you start having more eyeballs around the globe on you, more people's opinions on you. I heard Cardi B say this after she was already very famous and rich. And she was about to come out with another album. She was like, oh shit, all these opinions about to be at me. When you start rising for real, not like fucking on YouTube shit, you know what I'm saying? Not like writing books maybe. And it depends on what the book is about. You know what I mean? Doing all this shit that people doing, being a coach, making whatever money you're making as a coach. And that could trigger this shit too. But I mean, when you really start commanding the fucking world stage, as she and I were, because I'm telling you, if we would have continued from there, that was Europe, and that shit would have most definitely expanded into America, because that's where we were going to go. That was already my plan. But it's not just her. It's every person who I've partnered with has left for the same reason, with a different story of why. But it was fear underneath it all. And if we don't get our fucking emotions in check, and become, as Tim Ferriss says, fearless. And it's not that you don't have fear, you just fear less. That's his language. I look at it as having power with fear. Okay? If you don't get that under control, you're done. Like, you're going to be listening to podcasts, hoping and wishing and praying and getting ready for the rest of your fucking life. That's why I'd be like pretty bored to talk with humans. Even all these big talking people on the internet, all these big talking spiritual people on the internet, and power and God and the almighty and universal and who we are and all this and all that. Are you going to partner with me so we can actually prove that shit? And we're not proving it to other people. We're just proving what's in us. It's natural. Are you going to get into a 2 or more equation with like power? Are you going to get into a 2 or more equation of like power? Or maybe somebody who's even higher in power than you, so that you therefore increase in power and you guys persevere through resistance? Fuck resistance. Be really moved through resistance for real. Stop going in cycles. My nephew, like, humans don't want to go through cycles. Yes, they do, nephew. Watch them. Watch yourself. Like, I want to do that shit that we do beyond emotions. That's why today's topic is what happens after emotional intelligence, after emotional control, after you're no longer making stories about what you can and can't do, addicted and stuck and wound up in your biology. And listen, and you got biology. This is not to discount that. It's just like, that's it? That's it? Like, you're a vast being in this body on this earth. If you feel any limitations in your current body, hook up with somebody else who's really about the power and watch how your fucking power in your body amplifies. Even if you're not having sex just takes the shit through. You two powerful ass people, powerful for real. When I say powerful, I mean you are actively working to be devoid of programming, societal programming, religious programming, body programming. Because this guy, the scientist, even said, this doctor actually said yesterday, the one who wrote the Unseen Body, he said, so much of how humans have come to be today is because of who has died off, right? That's look, somebody might say that's Darwinian. I'm not going to start a whole other conversation here, but you see how dynamic this stuff is. And when you are pushing against the edges, exploring the edges of things that's outside of programming, this is what I care to do, because I care to live beyond, like, my time here in this body. Never mind the conversation about reincarnation, coming back in bird form, another body. My energy is still here when I leave. My legacy is still here when I leave. Great, good, fine. However, while I'm in this body, I am highly, highly, highly interested in what limits can be pushed. And we can only push limits when we go outside of the confines of tradition, outside of the confines of societal programming, outside of what you currently think is the limit. Remember when they thought, remember before the 4 minute mile, they were like, Nobody can do it for the limit, the social dominant limitation in the world of Olympics was that a mile took this long. And the first time that record was broke, motherfuckers' minds was blown. So here's the thing. Couldn't that have been done decades before? Yeah, but it hadn't been done because everybody thought that it couldn't be done. That's one of the countless examples of pushing the bounds of what you think is possible, and deliberately doing things like for 30 days, 6 months, fuck, a whole year, deliberately chase fear. Chase that shit down, bitch. Chase it down. When you become like that, you become your own version of me. You think I'm fearless? You know how many times that I've put myself in fucking panic attacks to get over fear? How much work I've done around my nervous system to get over fear? How many times spirit has told me to do things and I'm like, what? No. And I'm like, get through this fear, get through this fear, get through. I don't, listen, I'm something else. I am something else. And so are you. Outside of programming and conditioning and constantly talking about resistance, constantly talking about cycles of humans, constantly talking about fear, constantly talking about what we don't do. Yeah. Over it. Go talk to everybody else who's still going in that punk ass cycle my nephew talked about. Fuck you. So I want to share with you guys this guy's podcast. Lex, it might just come up because he's so popular. There it is. Boom. He's a computer scientist. Lex Fridman, Fridman. That's his name. You might not give a shit. You may. If you're digging what I'm talking about here, I think you're going to like his podcast. Lex, Lex Fridman, Fridman. And then there's other guy who I'm excited to look into even more is Sam Harris. Sam, you know how to spell Sam, and Harris, you know how to spell Harris. So, he's a Russian-born guy. I didn't know that. Lex Fridman is Russian-born. He's a Russian-born American computer scientist, artificial intelligence researcher, and podcast host working and teaching at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He was born in 86, so he's 35. He was born in Moscow. All righty. I leave you with this. Life is a hard game. Tomorrow's the last day of the Command the World stage series, and I'll see you tomorrow.